Welcome to From the VC's Bookshelf, a podcast from TBR, the College System of Tennessee, the state's largest higher education system. In this series, we examine how we might re-envision the work we do and how we work together as we move into a post-pandemic world. Please join our host, Dr. Heidi Lemming, Vice Chancellor for Student Success, as she leads a live discussion with industry experts and leaders throughout our system.
In our Fall 2024 podcast series, I'm pulling from a selection of articles and books that showcase current topics in the field of student success and student services. Interviews with the system and campus level staff who work in the specialty area connected to the article or book will serve as our panel experts. The central theme behind the fall series is about how various functional units housed under the student success umbrella are working across the TBR system to address the challenges and opportunities that are front and center as our institutions pursue the goal of increasing student success rates. So in this podcast series, again, focusing on a variety of articles and publications, this particular podcast, the publication is Driving Towards a Degree, released in 2023 through the Lumina Foundation. It is based on a study that looks at how institutions and technology providers can enhance student supports for everyone, with a particular focus on those with financial need. The survey that they conducted was analysis from students in spring of 2023 on their experiences and support preferences compared to institutional stakeholders. And the report has a strong emphasis on advising, with one of the top advising topics identified as financial issues. Because of that focus area, we have with us for this panel three the TBR staff who are working within financial aid. The first is Johnathan Button. Johnathan Button has worked in higher education for more than 17 years. He currently serves as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student and Financial Aid Services at the Tennessee Board of Regents. In this role, he coordinates operations for Student Service Center admissions, records, accounts receivable, and veterans educational benefits, as well as the Financial Aid Service Center that provides direct financial aid processing support to our Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology, as well as community colleges. Prior to his role at TBR, he served as the Associate Director of Financial Aid and Veterans Affairs at Austin Peay State University. Welcome, JB.
Thank you.
The second panelist is Cara, who currently serves as the Service Center Director for Financial Aid at the Tennessee Board of Regents. She came to the Financial Aid Service Center as a financial aid manager at the Tennessee College of Applied Technology at Nashville, where she served for 26 years. She has over 30 years of financial aid experience, all of it either non-term credit hour or clock hour schools. And she's been a member of TASFA and SASFA since 1994. For those listeners who don't know what that is, those are the professional state organizations and regional organizations for financial aid administrators. She is a past president and past treasurer of TASFA, married for 31 years, congratulations, and has a wonderful husband and a beautiful daughter who's completing her freshman year at Belmont University. Welcome, Cara.
Thank you.
And Robin Townson is our third panelist, currently serving as the Executive Director of Student Services Operations for Roane State Community College. She's been with Roane State now for over 34 years, working 9 years at one of Roane State's off-campus centers and over 25 years in financial aid. She currently oversees the processing for admissions records, graduation financial aid, and the recruiting and data intelligence offices for student services. She serves on numerous committees and a member of the team promoting Roane State's Success Coach model. Welcome.
Thank you.
So y'all combined experience is well over probably 100 years here. So we've got a wealth of experience on the panel today. Super excited to have this conversation with you. I think financial aid is one of those areas right now that people are paying particular attention to, and it is so nuanced and complicated that most folks just turn to the experts, you all, to help guide us in this conversation. So I think that'll be really interesting for our listeners. So let's dive into a couple of questions here related to this publication, Driving Toward a Degree. Again, very focused in advising work, but financial aid is certainly part of that. We don't like to think about our work in silos because it connects so much with just, again, how we're supporting students. One of the findings in the report is that while half of students believe financial issues are, quote, very important, unquote, to discuss with academic advisors, advisors don't view them as part of their role. This response is likely because of a lack of training in financial aid counseling or limited integration with financial aid data and the formalization of that role outside of academic advising. So would love to hear, again, as we think about financial aid regulations impacting several areas on campus, and that it's important for our directors to collaborate with multiple divisions in the execution of federal financial aid in particular. How do you foster those effective partnerships across campus offices, and how do those partnerships impact students? Let's start there. I'm willing to take volunteers for this question unless somebody wants to really jump in there. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll take this question. I think that this year more than ever, we're probably seeing this and feeling the reality of it with FAFSA simplification and all the new regulations coming out that are tied to a school's Title IV participation agreement. And for me, it's about the communication, the open lines of communication across all offices. I think when you think about an academic advisor or someone else, or somebody asking financial aid, they probably immediately have this fear of, I might tell the student the wrong thing, or, it's so complicated. So when I was a financial aid director and in my role now, my main job is to ensure that we are sharing any news that comes out and kind of taking that 5 to 6 page document and condensing it down into a couple of bullet points so everyone feels comfortable sharing a base level of information and then being able to say, if you have other things you need to know, we have a great financial aid team that you can go to. So with me, I think first line of defense is open communications and simplifying the communications down.
Mm-hmm. Cara, obviously at our TCATs have less complicated structures than our community colleges or even a university. So sometimes the person doing financial aid is also doing some of these other roles. It might be a little bit simpler response.
Right. It is. There is a smaller structure, so there's fewer people that have to be communicated with, but that communication still needs to happen. The instructors need to know those rules. The students need to have that information. The president, the counselors, everybody on the campus needs to have that same information. Mm-hmm. And again, as Johnathan said, they need to know that they can send those students to the financial aid office, to their experts to get additional information there. So again, the open sharing of communication is vitally important.
Yeah. I mean, Robin, at Roane State, you do have this success coach model that's addressing kind of breaking down those silos between departments. Can you speak to maybe more what that looks like so our listeners who might not know what that is, how it addresses this issue of communication?
Sure. Back in 2015, we actually implemented the success coach model. And we decided that we needed to take that holistic approach for our students, understanding that the decisions that are made in one area are going to impact their overall success. So you can't just be siloed with keeping information into one area. For example, financial aid. A student could be having issues in class. They may be advised to drop a class, and academically they might be the best option for them, but it may be the worst option for them in regards to their financial situation. Mm-hmm. So we decided that it was time to take a holistic approach. We have a core of success coaches, and all of our incoming freshmen are assigned a success coach. And those coaches go through 10 weeks of intense training, which includes financial aid, before they're allowed to meet with a student, so that coach is equipped to be able to give the student the best guidance, looking at all aspects of their educational experience, including financial aid. Mm-hmm. And it's really important in our training model that we make sure that we communicate changes. So we do have yearly training sessions. We have a designated email distribution list. So as things change that we need to make everyone aware who's in a frontline position, we communicate that with them and we share that information. So it's really important to us that we remove those silos and that students are not going from one office to another office process, and then it's left up to them to put the pieces together. We're trying to help them do that from the beginning.
Yeah, just kind of curious as a follow-up question to that, Rob. When you think about what you were doing prior to having the success coach model compared to now, I mean, you've been there a while, so I can ask you this. What are some noticeable changes in that communication as a result of this model?
One of the things that I think back to is when we were doing financial aid processing prior to this model, and we were trying to be that frontline person and process their aid and answer the questions that would come up to the financial aid office. We would have a backlog of processing that could be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks for the students. And for the students, that's really frustrating because the key piece for them to be able to come to school is how are they going to pay for it?
Right.
So when we went to this model from a processing perspective, we went to what we call now next day verification. So when the students complete their files, we have a team member who's looking at their information the next day. We're able to give students the information to them in a quicker time frame. So that really, we're removing that barrier for the student, and they can really focus on the areas they need to decide, for example, career exploration. Looking for academic advising, the wraparound supportive services that we provide to them, because we know that there's other things that are going to impact the student's success. And by removing that worry of when is their financial aid going to be processed, that just removes one barrier for them, and then they can focus on what they really need to.
Yeah, right. That's great. Another thing that the report highlights, and I'm just taking this verbatim from the report, is a necessary condition for holistic advising is student awareness of services beyond academic advising. So this is speaking to what you just mentioned, Robin. JB and Cara, what are some ways that you hear about how financial aid offices can ensure students are aware of support services offered by a school? In your roles, what have you heard?
Well, I think certainly it comes up in conversations with students as they're coming in, speaking to reception area or wherever you have. When I was at a campus, students would come in all the time with varying circumstances you'd have to work through. I'll never forget a student came in multiple times, never really talked to us about the issue, but then one trip came in and said, I'm living in the parking lot of Walmart. And through that conversation, we were able to say, we have so many services that you could take advantage of, and food pantry and all of these different things. So I think that's probably the main part where it's coming up in that. But one thing people may not recognize, just if you've never worked in financial aid, is how integrated financial aid offices are now with information technology offices, almost as a thing of survival, right? You have to use the tools to automate. And one thing that I see a lot of campuses do with the lottery scholarship every 24 hours is a benchmark. So a student who comes in the fall and they attempt 12 hours and they're going into their next 12 and going to hit that benchmark, if they're at or below that GPA standard, a lot of schools will now proactively communicate with them and connect them with tutoring or counseling or whatever they have. So that's just a really good way to take that work off, because they can automate those messages to go out, and they can also tie it to their text messaging and, just make sure that people are aware.
Yeah. You have anything, Cara?
Well, at the TCATs, the technical colleges, smaller staffs. So the financial aid offices and the student services office and instructors are all very aware of student situations, and they work together. So if the students are with those instructors basically 6 hours a day, 5 days a week at the technical colleges. So the instructors really know what is going on with the student's life. So it's important that those instructors are aware of those services and can refer those students to the financial aid office, to the student services office, and then together the three areas, instructions, financial aid, student services, can work to help that student through their situation and get them the services that they need. And I think that's really one of the prime benefits of being the small staffed at the technical colleges. That really helps us to know our students. We don't have lots of offices that they have to go through, and we all are generally in the same area so that they can work together. And student services knows that, this can affect your financial aid. Let's get your financial aid office in here and make sure we're all on the same page on what's the best step for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, I mean, all of our schools are significantly smaller than our large universities, so it's going to be easier probably in general for any of our institutions. Robin, how do you foster an engaging climate with your office where students feel that they can come in and visit and ask questions?
Well, that's one of the, I think, another advantage of our Success Coach model that we have is that we have integrated into our area the one-stop center that we have along with our success coaches. And so it's really important for our success coaches when they're meeting with students is to build relationships. And that means that the more that they're able to do that, the students are then feeling that they can trust and come to those success coaches for whatever need that they may have. So they're often doing things with our students just to engage with them. So they may have, if it's finals week, they will have things provided for the students to drop by, snacks, to help them through finals week. During holidays, there's often different things that they're promoting with the students just to engage with them, to give them that sense of feeling and belonging, that it's not just an office that you come in and ask a question and go out of. It truly is building that relationship. And when you build that relationship, the students are going to feel more comfortable in coming and hopefully addressing any issues before they really can lead to detrimental impacts on their success. Hopefully to be able to identify resources that we can bring to them so that they can help resolve, whether it be like we've mentioned, the tutoring center, our learning center, our food pantry, outside supportive services that can help them. Our foundation often helps students with emergency assistance for like gas, unexpected car repairs and things like that. So it all goes back to building that relationship with the students.
Yeah. Well, speaking of relationships with students, I mean, JB, your personal story, you got into financial aid because you were working in a financial aid office, right? So, I mean, again, that's a perfect way to show how, like, when you're engaging with these students, how you could change their career path potentially to be a financial aid director or just connect with the institution, right?
Right. Yeah, it's very personal for me, this work, first generation student coming from a background where you knew if you didn't get a scholarship, you were not going to college. And when I came in, I went from pre-med to being a teacher to all these different things. But the one thing I always knew is I wanted to help people. And I started as a federal work study student in financial aid, and I found very quickly I could see myself in everybody coming in. And every time I saw somebody and I said, hey, are you aware there's Pell Grant? Are you aware of this? And I could see that change happen in their lives. It reminded me of myself. And eventually I decided, you know what? I don't want to be a teacher. I want to be a financial aid professional. And that's not something you do as a kid. You don't go to school to be a financial aid professional. So
you probably don't realize all the different careers in student affairs in general when you're that young, right? And that's how a lot of us ended up in the positions that we're in, is you got engaged, mentored by someone in student affairs. One of the other things that the report looks at is the use of technology in better serving students. And JB, you were speaking to this just a moment ago about kind of automating messages to students at different, benchmarks in their pathway, 12 credit hours, whatever it might be. As the report states, however, a lack of solution integration and too many solutions that aren't connected are the top two barriers to effectively using advising technologies. So even outside of financial aid, when we think about advising technologies, and I know of all the different platforms and things that folks are using across our institutions, how many there are, and there's even more than that, right? But I would just like to hear reflections from both the system and campus level on that point, because number one, technology is important in enabling you to do your jobs, right, and to engage students. But what are some other innovations that maybe you've developed, technologies that support student success that maybe folks aren't aware of, that you might want to talk about those different types of innovations? And do you agree that technology integration across platforms is a barrier? I would like to hear that, because we are so in that age right now where everything, it seems, is trying to be connected to technology, and everyone's pursuing that. And that can be a costly venture, both in the money for that, but also in investment and time to implement these technologies as they evolve and constantly are changing. So system level perspective and then campus level perspective. Let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so from a campus level perspective, we're not dealing directly with students, but what we are doing is dealing directly with the staff the faculty at the campus that are servicing the students. And, one thing that I find all the time is that, going back to what Robin said earlier about if we can improve the time that it takes to process, that directly is then impacting the student and they're able to get their funds. So we focus on that, but I'd say with the technologies, it can definitely be a barrier. Where I always start is ask yourself what you have right now, and if that technology isn't being used in that way, ask yourself, can it be used that way? And then go from there. I think sometimes there's this trigger reaction where you see a new technology, it's great, and you get it, and now you've found yourself, you have 20 different technologies, and one thing could have maybe done 4 or 5 of those things. So I think that's the first question to ask. But as far as development, we always ask ourselves when we are presented with a problem of, can we automate this? So an example would be, campus needs to award 1,000 students, some kind of new fund that comes through. Our first reaction is going to be, let's write a script. Let's have the system do that. There's no reason that somebody should be sitting over in a corner of an office manually awarding 1,000 students when we could do it in 5 minutes. So those are the kind of things I think from a system office perspective, that's our job, because financial aid directors come to us, they're looking at us to say, what are other people doing? Maybe this campus over here has a process that takes 30 minutes and another campus is doing everything manually. It's taking them a couple of weeks. Well, our job is to then connect the two and say, can you share that? Let's modify it very easily, get it working at another campus.
Yeah. Campus level perspective?
I think one of the best things that we did prior to, before we were Success Coach model driven, we would rely on emails or paper letters that we would send to students. And how many times have we heard, I didn't get the email, I didn't get the letter, and that would be why that they would wait to turn something in, or they would say they didn't know that they had to turn something in. So what we implemented through technology is in our student portal, when students log in, they immediately have what we call an alert box. And we are very intentional with the messages that we place in that alert box. It's really anything that requires attention from the students. And our success coaches spend time emphasizing the importance of checking the alert box and that it changes and you need to check it on a regular basis. We have such a much better response from our students in taking care of anything that is placed in the alert box. And again, I think because we've been very intentional, you won't find, there's free food in the cafeteria in the alert box. What you will find in the alert box is, for example, maybe a faculty member has reported that the student has never attended class, and it will tell the student specifically what faculty member has reported that information, or if they have outstanding requirements or a balance due. And I think we have to keep in mind, too, that our students respond to different types of technology in different ways. So what may not be the most appropriate or the most adequate method for all students to respond, we do need to remember that students are going to respond differently. Another thing that we implemented that I think has been very helpful with our coaches in establishing that relationship is in the student portal, we have various versions of like a smiley face, a sad face, a non-responsive face that they can simply click about how they're feeling. And that information actually gets sent to the coach for the coach to reach out and say, hey, I noticed that you kind of indicated you're not having a really good day. Is there something I can help you with? Is there something going on? So I think that we've been able to take technology in that way and really connect again with the students to meet their needs.
Well, and what you just mentioned is also the importance of how people still are part of that process. Is not simply technology being the solution. You have just identified how you can check in with a student, get all this information, but ultimately a person is still reaching back and looking at that information and reacting to the student in some way. So it's not just shifting the work and actually it's just making it more robust, the information you've got, but you all had to make an investment in success coaches still.
Yes. And I think the key is that technology can never replace that human interaction. It can supplement what you need to further enhance those relationships.
And if I may, something both of you just said that made me think, it has to stay simple.
Yes.
You cannot overcomplicate it or else people are not going to use the technology. And I think we've talked about how complicated financial aid is. If you look at financial aid holistically, there's hundreds of processes that have to be completed, but it's so individualized. Each student, one student might need to fill out a form and do 10 of the questions on the form. Another student might need to do 2 of them. And I think what's been very helpful over the years for us is instead of now having forms that are just one form for everyone, you can create forms with skip logic now that allows students, this student over here does a very simple form. The student does just what they need to see. So I would say keep it simple.
And you, with all the different technologies coming to the campus, what do you think? Do you agree with the statement that there potentially are barriers in how many different technologies are being used?
Yes, I definitely. I mean, again, I think that from a campus perspective, just trying to stay on top of everything and keeping in mind the overall picture of how everything is going to work together. I think that's the end goal, is that technology is great and it can help us do our jobs better every day. But if we're not careful, it can also be a barrier. It can be a burden. It can be that road bump that you're going to run into that can cause you to not be able to be as efficient as what you need to be. So I do think it's very important that we stay aware of the technology and all the different programs that we have. It's very important that we stay informed about those. The one constant that we have in financial aid that I always say is change. So you can always count on that there will be something changing that we will be dealing with.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, the poor individual that has to check 5 different platforms on any given day to pull all this stuff together, that's a lift as well, right? It's not simplifying anything. Another, and this is my kind of final reflection from this report, is that they mentioned that students who are aware of financial aid services at their institution identify it as important to their retention decisions. And furthermore, students who feel more strongly that they have the necessary resources to pay for college also report higher rates of belonging. And so a lot of the work that we do in student success is about having that student feel a connection to faculty, staff, the institution, that sense of belonging, because that is what's going to retain them between their academic terms and year after year. We know, again, financial aid rules can be complicated. We've talked about that. People are well aware of that. But I'm kind of curious what you think are some methods that you use to ensure that communications to students are simple, like we talked about, but also lead to the completion of the requirements rather than just additional barriers when we think about, again, returning, knowing all the resources that encourages them to have that sense of belonging on campus.
Well, we talked a little bit about skip logic, and I think that's a big deal in financial aid. Again, if you can have a student who answers a question, maybe there's 6 questions overall, but their answer to the first one means they get to skip the next 3, that's gold in financial aid. As far as communications and things, I think you've got to have a rule to be concise. You can have a communication that's 2 pages long, but why would you do that if you can condense it down to 1 paragraph with some bullet points? And I think we have to be mindful of that. And as a financial aid professional, we all speak in acronyms, and really anyone in higher ed, but it seems like in Veterans Affairs and financial aid, everything we do is an acronym. And we have to remind ourselves, people on the outside have no idea what we're talking about. So simplify it down, have someone read it. I mean, I've known several financial aid directors who've said, I get into the work every day and I know what I'm talking about. Have somebody outside the office. If it's going to be a blanket communication sent out via text, have someone else read it and see if they understand it. If you know that somebody outside of financial aid understands it, you're probably good.
Yeah, I've had campuses tell me that they have students, sometimes just student workers or others, read stuff before they send it out. And I think the research on reading levels shows you need to write at an 8th grade level for the average person to understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely a trick that I used when I was at the campus, is that, had somebody outside financial aid. I had several instructors that I would take things to. Occasionally we use the administrative office technology students to read through it as well, for grammar and that as well. But I mean, just to get their perspective on, can you follow this? Does this make sense to you? Am I using words that you maybe aren't familiar with or that aren't directing you in the right direction? So that is a very good trick.
Yeah.
We just recently have a dedicated student communications manager, and often we will go to that manager, even if it's just simple wording on a form, and ask, because he does not have a financial aid background.
Okay.
And so we will ask, for his input and any suggestions to try to make the language easier to understand, because I agree, if we overcomplicate the message that we're trying to send, it's only going to cause frustrations for the students. And that's the last thing that we want to do.
Mm-hmm. It's also in our word choices. So when we talk about, how you're framing the message to encourage a sense of belonging. Have you all had conversations about that? Like how you frame it as opposed to like, you didn't do this, and kind of the punishment kind of focus?
Right. You always want to come at any kind of financial aid communication as an encourager and a motivator to get things done. So, you don't want to ever come from that idea that you're penalizing somebody because they missed this deadline. Maybe they did miss your priority deadline, and maybe there is something negative for that, but it still doesn't change the fact of it's Title IV aid, it's federal aid. So, and that's what we're in the business of. So we shouldn't knock a student down because they missed one thing. We should be motivating them and saying, like, it's not too late, right? It's not the first day of class yet, or we get to the first day of class, maybe it's not done. Then the communication changes to, it's not to the census date yet. It's not too late. So I think we're constantly in the job of motivating people.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's your word choice. I think a lot of times when you're working with a student, when you simply say, okay, let's see what we can do to get across this situation, to resolve it. And I think they see then that it's a team that's working together, that you're there trying to help the student work through that situation. Instead of pointing out like, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. Mm-hmm. It's what can we do to get this resolved.
Right. Yeah.
One thing that Robin just reminded me of, satisfactory academic progress. Mm-hmm. That's probably one of the most important communications in financial aid, where you do not want to knock a student down. You want to explain to them what's happened. Maybe they have violated it, and maybe they are in a situation where they're not eligible for aid. But you want to emphasize that you can appeal. You can do this. There's support services. There's things like that. So I think that's probably one of the biggest communications where you can kind of see financial aid needs to be very positive in that, even though it is a negative situation.
Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed kind of digging in with some of these themes from the report with you all today. Does anybody have kind of any other final reflections, something that you read from Driving Toward a Degree that you want to make sure our listeners are aware of? I don't just open-ended question here. Maybe I've covered the highlights, but again, the basics of the report are more on advising. But I think what's interesting about this conversation is that financial aid definitely needs to be part of that advising piece.
Reading it for me, it was just over and over again, it's the awareness piece. Mm-hmm. And I think it can be easy sometimes for people to sit back and think, well, this is very simple. They probably already know this. For a financial aid professional, for anyone in higher education, I think we need to take those assumptions away. If a student hears it 10 times, the student's heard it 10 times, but share the information. Because again, this report shows that awareness has a very positive impact on how not only the student completing requirements, but also the student feeling very connected. And that connectedness is what helps people have grit, right? I mean, when you have a situation where you're doing poorly in a course or whatever have you, if you know the right people to go to, if you know there are people who care about you on that campus, that is your connection, and you can be much more likely to be successful and to stay with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, it just reiterated the holistic approach that we need to really think about with our students. It's not just financial aid. It's all of the pieces coming together, and we need to keep that in mind as we all are working together.
Mm-hmm. Great way to end the conversation today. Thank you so much for your time and for sitting and talking with me about the importance of financial aid in the advising work that we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this edition of From the VC's Bookshelf, brought to you by TBR, the College System of Tennessee, powering the state's economy and changing the lives of thousands of graduates, starting successful careers each year. To learn more about upcoming book selections or to register to attend discussions live, visit tbr.edu/bookshelf.